In today's episode, I'm going to talk about the 2022 remote work predictions, how these predictions might get you thinking a little differently about remote work, and help you make some decisions. Welcome to the Remote Work Retirement Show. I'm your host, Camille Attell, and this is the only show dedicated to remote work for semi-retirees, people leaving the workforce, and people working in retirement to help them have peace of mind that they can live how they want without the fear of running out of money. Before we get into today's episode, I want to tell you that I'm actually standing up to record this. Why? I have a feeling I'm going to get very animated and passionate about all the things I'm talking about today. So if you go back and listen to episode 1, and it seems like I'm a little more excited for episode 2, it's because a lot of the things I'm going to be talking about, I've just been thinking about for so long, and I'm excited to talk about them today. But before we get into these predictions, I want to take you back to 1987. I'm probably going to use a lot of 80s references in this show because I was heavily influenced by the 80s. I was born in the early 70s, just so you know, but the 80s were really impactful for me for a lot of reasons. One of those reasons is the stock market. So 1987, Black Monday, we have a stock market crash. Now, I was really young. I was a young teenager. And at the time, I was living with my grandparents. I'll tell you more about that another time, but just know for right now, my grandparents had a heavy hand in raising me. And they were Depression era, military, career Air Force, and very conservative. And I lived with them a lot, on and off a lot. My parents, on the other hand, total hippies, hate Ashbury, riding motorcycles through, the sequoias, could not be more opposite. So I have this very practical yet, I don't know what you call it, spirit about me. Okay. I'm like part practical and I'm part whimsical, if that makes sense. Okay. Let me stay on track. 1987 stock market crashes. My grandfather pounds his fist on the table and starts shouting at the television. And it freaked me out. I don't know what the heck is going on. I wasn't following the stock market at that time. I was just like in junior high or something, trying to get through a school day. And I remember not only him being so upset and yelling at the television things I'm not going to say on the show today, but people around me, all the other adults being really angry and upset. And what is kind of amusing about that story is the other day I was sitting there watching the stock market news, which I've been doing lately, and the CEO of C3 AI, which is an artificial intelligence agency, his name is Tom Seibel. They're interviewing him, and the question was all about remote work. Are you going to let your workforce work remotely? What do you think about that? How's that going to work? And his stance is probably not. I don't think so. I don't see remote work really being the future, or I don't really see it being, a big part of our culture or mainstream. And I literally yelled at the television. I was like, he is so wrong. How can this guy get this so wrong? Doesn't he understand where everything is going? And I had to stop and go, wow, I am just like my grandfather. So I thought that was funny. And that really kicks off today's episode and what inspired me to do this, because I have been telling my husband's probably really tired of me talking to him, but every day I'm like, oh my gosh, I have a new prediction. Oh my gosh, I can't believe people aren't talking about this. Oh my gosh, don't people see what's happening with XYZ? And that's what led me to really collect my thoughts and put them into this episode. I have 7 core predictions for remote work, and then I have a bonus prediction at the end. Now, let me say this. These predictions are meant to be for 2022, but I have to tell you, it's hard for me to think in terms of the next year ahead because I've always been a real visionary thinker, like a long-term strategic thinker. I think in terms of 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road. So to see all these big visions and then have to dial it back to 1 year is not so easy for me. For example, in 2017, when my remote work school first got launched, it's because I saw a future of really everyone working remotely at that time from an RV, because I was in an RV. And look where we are today. But I'm going to try to make this specific to 2022 because that's what this episode is meant to be about. Let me tell you that the overarching theme of these predictions, I'll go through them one by one, but the big takeaway, the big theme, if you will, from all of this is that 2022 will be another year of everyone figuring it out. While we are starting to see things settle a little bit, which I'll talk about that in the job market, I think companies are still really trying to understand how to make this whole remote thing work, right? Not just big companies, small companies. People are trying to figure out, are they going to work from home? Are they going to go back to the office? Companies are implementing policies that may or may not work. So I do think that 2022 is still a big year of transition and flux, but I do think we're going to see a lot more innovation in 2022 that we didn't see in 2021. These predictions are purely from my own imagination. So unlike episode 1, where I did quite a bit of research and I pulled in a lot of data from other sources, I really wanted these predictions to be my own, meaning these are 100% my own original thoughts. I didn't go read some other person's prediction and make it my own, because I really think that if you're going to listen to this show, that you know that I'm someone who is very imaginative and you're hearing my pure 100% thoughts. And I think that's important because if you like that, then I am for you. And I will blend in research and I will bring data in when that makes sense. But for this particular show, I really wanted this to be as organic as possible. Now, of course, I'm influenced by things that I read and listen to, but I do like to form my own opinions. Okay. Prediction number 1, the hiring market remains strong for employees. So in last week's episode, episode 1, I talked about how it's an employees market right now because we've been going through such a huge correction and companies are losing talent. We had the great resignation, all of that, right now employees have the upper hand when it comes to jobs. And that's because really companies were really caught off guard. 2020, 2021, companies were scrambling to either keep people, create jobs, figure out how to get people to work from home. And through that, we saw a lot of people leaving the workforce because quite frankly, people are fed up. You know, they don't want to work in jobs they don't like. They don't want to work for bosses they don't like. And this is not a knock on companies and employers. It's just that we really needed a disruption. I mean, it's been 100 years really since we've had, a real disruption in workforce. Really, companies and employers and bosses and management have always had the power. And so this is one of the first major times in history where we're seeing employees have the power. So I think this continues into 2022 because businesses are now catching up. So what does this mean specifically, and what does it mean for you, and how can you take advantage of this? Well, there will be more job creation. And I think the incentives, the hiring incentives, like hiring bonuses and additional benefits and referrals or referral bonuses for referring a friend or someone to work at a company, that's going to continue. If you're not aware already, this is happening. Sometimes I make assumptions about what people know or don't know, and I really shouldn't make that assumption. I'm very aware that there are loads of bonuses right now. Companies literally throwing money at people to say, please come work here. And then there's things like retention bonuses where if you stay for a certain period of time, you get another bonus. So there's like a lot of benefit and value to that if you're someone who is looking to get a job with a company in particular. If you're going to work for yourself, then this does not apply to you, but we'll get to that later. But if you want to work for a company, you want to work for an employer, then now's a really great time to get yourself out there because there are a lot of additional benefits and bonuses going around. So always apply to a job, even if you don't think you're qualified. The other day, I was coaching in the coaching circle inside of Remote Work School. And what we do in those circles is it ranges. Sometimes we work on people's resumes, cover letters. We update their LinkedIn account. Maybe we work on a business idea they have. It really does range. But a trend that I see sometimes is that people are waiting. They're like, well, I want to wait for the right time, or I want to wait till my resume is perfect, or I haven't updated LinkedIn yet, so I really can't apply to that job. And my guidance is no. Apply now. Employers are looking for you. And if you're sitting around, tinkering with your resume and trying to get everything perfect on LinkedIn, then you're literally missing out on these opportunities. And these employers can't find you, and they want you and they need you. So get yourself in the position, like apply to these jobs, put yourself out there and just go for it. Okay, so that was prediction number one. The hiring market remains strong for employees. Prediction number two is that the hybrid workforce model will start to fail. I don't think it will fail completely in 2022, but I think we're going to start to see that that's not going to work as well. And what do I mean by that? The hybrid model is employers and companies wanting people to start returning to the office, but they're trying to make concessions and say, all right, come in, 3 days a week, work from home 2 days a week. Sounds nice. It sounds very gracious. And I think companies are doing their best to accommodate people who want to work from home or work remotely, but it doesn't make any sense, okay, to me, because here's why. At the end of the day, it's still the employer calling the shots, right? It's still the employer saying, this is our policy. We're not in that era anymore, or at least we're inching out of that era. We're moving into an era where, again, employees have the upper hand. Employees have pick of the litter on jobs right now. And so employees get to say, no, I don't want to do that. That doesn't work for me. And they're going to go look for the companies that give them the most options. So I think companies are going to start figuring out that the hybrid model, while, a nice compromise, is not really that sustainable. What are you going to have, half your workforce come in Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the other half come in Tuesday, Thursday? What if someone has a kid they've got to take to school? What if someone is taking care of a loved one at home? At the end of the day, companies just have to give people options and let people choose what's going to work for them. So that's going to take some time. That's not going to happen exactly in 2022, but I do think that we will start to see these policies shift. I also don't think they're going to be cost effective. I'll have to look into the data on that, but I just don't see how that's going to work. So for you in particular, here's the thing I want you to know. Be patient if you can. We've got to give employers and companies a break. Okay. I know, I always lean on the side of being an employee advocate. I always have, I always will. But I also know that, look, we need jobs. We need commerce. We need the economy to be strong. And that requires companies and employers who hire people. And they're trying to figure this out. And so let them figure it out. If there's a job you really want and it appeals to you, but the only problem is it's not remote or remote the way you like it, like consider taking the job and consider working with the employer and letting them kind of figure it out with your input. Don't just say no to a job because that's the only problem is remote work, right? If it ticks a lot of boxes, like really strongly consider it and think of this more of like a partnership with the employer than, hey, I call the shots and I say no. Okay. All right. Which brings me to number three. Prediction number three is I see the development of what I'm going to call the remote work mashup model. So the hybrid model, I think, is going to start failing, but I think a mashup model will start to rise. Now, what do I mean by that? At the end of the day, I think where we're really headed, if I'm thinking, way far out now, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, I think gone are the days of people having one job. I just don't think that's that realistic anymore. Like, how we used to have way back in the day, you'd get a job, you'd stay in that job for 1,000,000 years, you'd get a nice pension, a gold watch. Okay, that's been out for a really long time. But even just having one job for a really long time, and by long time, that might be 5 years. I just don't see that working anymore. I think everything is becoming very fractured, very decentralized. There's so many new businesses popping up, which I'll talk about here in a minute. There's so many more options. People can work online now. People can work for themselves. People can start side businesses. So gone are the days of having one job that brings you one income for, 10, 20 years. I just don't see how that's going to work. And so what I think is going to start happening really started happening in 2020, 2021, but really more so in 2022, is that people are going to start looking at a variety of income possibilities around work. So maybe that's working for someone else part-time. Maybe that's working for yourself sometimes, like freelance, which I talked about in episode 1. Maybe that's figuring out some other services you can sell. Maybe you're someone who wants to do something with e-commerce, or maybe you're turning your passion into something that can be profitable for you. And I don't see where, for a lot of people, where only one of those things is going to bring you enough income, maybe over the long term. But in the immediate term, over the next few years, if you're kind of starting up on any of those things, I see a combination. So I'm going to call that the mashup model. I don't know if I'm making that up, but you've heard it here first on this show. This is especially important if you're semi-retired or if you plan to work in retirement, because I do believe that the mashup model or the freelance model or the model where you're taking a passion or an interest and turning that into something that you can generate income from, I think that is especially relevant to you. I really do. So really think about that and consider that as an option. Okay, prediction number 4 is all around people returning to the workforce. So you've heard about the Great Resignation of 2021. I talked about that in episode 1. Also in 2020, we had a lot of layoffs. We also saw a lot of early retirement. So now you're seeing that, or if you haven't seen it, I'm following the statistics and the data, and it's showing that, this is really one of the biggest times in history where we have a labor shortage. Okay. But here's the reality of that. That is just not going to last. People will probably have to come out of retirement. And when they come out of retirement, they're going to look for work. People who started businesses in 2020 and 2021, which by the way was just massive. I think the number is something like 4 million or so, somewhere between 4 and 5 million people started businesses in 2020, 2021. The thing about this is, I think a lot of this is temporary. I mean, I hope not, right? I hope that if someone wants to retire early, they can. Awesome, great. I hope that if someone starts a business, that it is successful, of course. But the reality is, this is not going to be a one and done for a lot of people. Maybe someone had to come out of retirement because they're realizing, I don't think my income is going to last. Or maybe they were forced to take early Social Security, like I talked about in episode 1. And they're looking at their time horizon and they're saying, gosh, I'm probably going to live another 20 years, God willing. And so what am I going to do to supplement my income, right? So I think we'll see people coming out of retirement. And I think because there is a labor shortage, that companies are going to be more open and willing to actually hire these people back. But you got to be ready. So we'll talk more about that later. And then people who started these businesses, unfortunately, a lot of businesses fail. Now, fail is a weird word. You could, what does failure really mean? Does that mean flatly that you don't make enough money? Does it mean you, hated it? What does it mean? Well, it could mean a variety of things depending on who you are. For some people, maybe they just got exhausted. Running a business is not easy. And even if you are generating the income that you wanted, maybe you're burnt out. I've experienced that. I have gone through periods of, emotional burnout, mental burnout. I've even gone through periods of like financial scarcity in business going, ooh, I don't know. Like, am I going to make it through the next 2 months? Right. And so for some of those people, they may close their business and they may decide to return to the workforce, or they may decide to do my mashup model, right? But I do think we will start to see people returning to the workforce later in 2022 because people are still kind of figuring this out. But I also think there will still be very healthy business creation in 2022. People coming out of the workforce and creating more businesses. So all around, I think we'll have more job growth and we'll see more people wanting to take those jobs. And that's all a really good thing. Because I think people are going to return to the workforce and people will want to take advantage of this rich job market, it's really important that you think about not burning bridges. So don't walk into your boss or your manager's office and tell them to take a flying leap, right? Don't leave a job and say they stink because they didn't, let me work remotely. The old message of don't burn bridges, I think, is more important now than ever because everything is cyclical, right? All of this is probably going to shake out. We're probably going to get to a point of stability. And these relationships are really important. I haven't talked a lot yet about LinkedIn. LinkedIn is an online job platform. If you haven't been on there lately, then you really haven't seen the massive growth and potential that it's developed over the last few years. But I think everyone needs to be on LinkedIn. And if everybody's on LinkedIn, especially if you're job searching or, you're starting a business or whatever, you've got to be present on at least one of the most relevant platforms out there. But because of that, your work history and your relationships are going to be very public. And so you really need to consider that the relationships that you have now, that you keep them as healthy as possible. So that's my little tidbit there. Let's get into prediction number 5. This one, I think, is one that I'm really excited about. And this is the expansion of learning access. What do I mean by that? Well, in 2020, when everyone was forced into remote work, not everyone was really prepared for that. Businesses weren't prepared for that. Schools were definitely not prepared for that. People weren't prepared for that. How do I log into Zoom? How do I attend a meeting? Businesses are like, how do we do training now when everybody's at home behind a computer? And so one of the reasons that people say remote learning doesn't work or remote work is terrible is because people don't know how to provide really solid quality learning experiences remotely. Now, as you know, if you've listened to episode 1, I come from corporate training. I've been doing that for 20 something years. And so I know how to create really effective learning programs. So for me, when I saw everyone go remote, people complaining about it, I'm like, well, they just don't know how to create great training. And if they really understood how to deliver a quality experience, then people wouldn't be complaining so much. So what I see happening in 2022 is that companies and businesses are going to create, and schools too, schools they're actually ahead. They're ahead of business, quite frankly, are going to create much better learning quality and access. And what I mean by that, like specifically, is not everyone can jump on an online learning training that is self-study and learn. There's a lot of people that they can't do that. They can't just sit in front of a computer for a million hours and try to learn how to do a job by watching a bunch of boring videos, right? So we have to get smarter with how we deliver the learning. So here are some examples. Well, I'll take Remote Work School as an example. That is my online program where I teach and coach people how to get remote work. In 2017, the first iteration of Remote Work School was all video and a couple of handouts. And I should have known better. Let me say this. That's on me. I came from the world of training. I should have built a better program. I mean, nobody ever complained about it, but of course, I'm a perfectionist. And in my head, I was like, wow, I really missed the boat. I should have really thought about all these learning styles. But in 2017, I was newer to online learning. I'd always been in the classroom. And so in 2022, I made a conscious decision to rebuild the whole thing from scratch. And when I rebuilt the whole thing from scratch, what I did is I created video lessons for people who are video learners. That includes closed caption, because some people who might have hearing loss may actually need to read things on screen or in transcription. Some people learn by doing. They can't just watch something or listen to something. They need to actually apply it. So I created workbooks that you implement for every single lesson. Some people need accountability. They're not going to sit down and study something unless someone is there to help them get through it. That's why I created coaching circles. And this is what I mean. So in Remote Work School, I've hit every possible learning modality, not just for people who learn differently, but people who need access to learning. People, like I just mentioned, maybe they have sight challenges or hearing challenges, people with disability who need different access. And so I think that this will absolutely become not only a trend in 2020, but it's super critical. If you want your workforce to be trained and be effective at their jobs, then this is what you actually have to provide them to be effective. Now, I'm going to talk about this next thing, not as a different prediction. It's just slightly different. So I'm going to list this under the same prediction as learning access and expansion. And that is the continuation of diversity and inclusion in the workplace. We saw a lot more of diversity and inclusion take hold in 2020. That is for, giving people in underrepresented communities more opportunities. These are going to be people of color, LGBTQI plus, again, people with disabilities. I think that continues into 2022. And again, alongside that, we do have to make learning and training and developing employees more accessible. Okay, this next one is, I don't know how to explain this one. I'm kind of excited about it. I kind of think this is very futuristic. But let me tell you, let me just get into it. I think that this is the prediction number 6. I think that the applicant tracking systems are going to need an overhaul. So let me tell you what an applicant tracking system is. If you are applying to jobs online, so if you're on an online job platform and you're submitting your resume, it's going into an applicant tracking system, which is, it's just technology, right? Those systems have been built. I hate to say this word, but I mean, it's kind of true. They're almost built for discrimination. And I'll tell you more about this here in a minute. But what I mean by that is they're just looking, these are bots, these are robots, basically. They're not humans looking at a resume. And so there are different things the robots are picking up and kicking out. Like they're literally kicking your resume out of the system. And so that's going to have to change. I mean, when you have a labor shortage, when you have people that have all the options in the world, when you have really good quality workers or people who are willing to take jobs getting kicked out of the system because of a robot, that's just not going to work. And so I think these systems are going to have to go through an absolutely radical system change. I don't think it's going to happen in 2022 so much, but I think people are going to have to start reconstructing them in 2022, because I'm not kidding you. These systems will kick a resume out, for things as simple as, you're missing a period on the end of a sentence. Not always, but sometimes. But let's talk about this discrimination thing for a minute, because I know this is ooh, I'm going into some interesting territory here. There's a really good documentary that talks about this called Coded Bias. I think it came out in maybe 2018, 2019. And what it is there was an MIT researcher named Joy Blaumini. And she's also a poet. She's really done some incredible research. And she was able to, through her research, show and prove that a lot of the facial recognition systems are biased. So they were these facial recognition systems. So, we're online all day, right? And we're looking at our phones and we're looking at computers and, we're in Zoom and all these things, that there is bias in there. So for example, maybe people applying for, housing, perhaps are getting rejected based on this bias. People applying to jobs are getting rejected based on this bias, because these systems and applicant tracking systems fit into this category. While they aren't facial recognition so much necessarily, they are built around algorithms and around looking for certain patterns in resumes. This is why I think ageism happens even as early in the application process, because your applicant tracking systems potentially, whether it was programmed or unconscious, might be kicking people out for things like age. Now, I used to do a lot of management training back in the day. And one of the most interesting trainings I went to was all around hiring bias. And one of the things we did was we got in a room, all of us managers got in a room, we passed around these resumes and we talked about, okay, of all the applications, all these resumes applying to this specific job, who would you hire? Now, what we didn't know at the time when we did this whole activity, all of the resumes were exactly the same. Same work experience, same history, same extracurricular activities. The only thing different was the name on the resume. So resume 1 had the name of potentially someone who is female, maybe, don't know. But that person appeared to have some Asian descent. We don't know, right? Another one I remember had a name that looked like the person might be from India, and so on and so forth. The person who got hired the most in this exercise was a guy named John Smith. Same resumes, same history, same background. John Smith got hired. Okay. So that is how bias can actually show up in the hiring process. But I think it's even more prevalent in the applicant tracking systems. And I think they're going to need an overhaul. I think in a future episode, I will definitely talk about resumes in particular and how, things you can do to actually get your resume through those applicant tracking systems, or at least improve the odds. But until these companies change these systems, which again, I don't think will completely happen in 2022, but I think they're going to have to start looking at it. There's not a whole lot you can do. Actually, let me back up and say, yes, there is. And that is always go back to the core of leveraging your own network. Like if your only job search strategy right now is, putting your resume through a system or, applying online, you need a diversified strategy. You need to be tapping into your own network. You need to be talking with friends. You need to be reaching out to other coworkers. You need to rely on more than just throwing your resume out into some technology and then probably not hearing back is my guess. A lot of crickets, right? So there's my tip on that one. Okay. The last prediction I have is that in 2022, we will continue to see the rise of people working from everywhere. Now, it's called work from home, but that's so limiting. Lots of people want to work from home, but people don't only want to work from home. People want options. People want to travel and work. Maybe they want to live somewhere else and work for a while. Maybe they want to go on vacation and take their laptop and work, or whatever variation, work from an RV like I did, right? And I read this thing the other day where someone said that digital nomadism was dead. Like it was like not going to be a thing anymore. And I was like, what? How are they coming up with that? And their argument was because people can't work from coffee shops anymore and they can't work from co-working spaces as much. And I get that viewpoint, but that's so limiting. If you're a digital nomad or you want to be a digital nomad, the reality is we are a very resilient bunch of people. We don't rely on coffee shops and co-working spaces. Sometimes we do, but we know how to carry our own internet. We know how to have our own data. We know how to use multiple devices to get online. And so I just don't see how that is going to decrease. I think there's just more of that. And I think rather than people being limited to working from home, people are going to want to work everywhere, anywhere, anytime. So again, if you're listening to this going, yeah, I want to work and travel, totally possible. I think we just see more of it. If you want to work from an RV like I did, again, I just think there's more of that coming. We saw a huge spike in that in 2020, by the way, because RVing was one of the safest ways to travel. So we saw just a massive spike in the RV industry and a lot of people working from their RVs. So I don't see this decreasing at all. I see it continuing. Okay, so those were the top trends. I'm just going to run through them really quickly one more time. The hiring market remains strong for employees. The hybrid workforce will start to fail and the mashup workforce will rise. Number 4 is the people will return to the workforce because they're coming out of retirement. Maybe they're moving away from starting a business. Number 5 is the expansion of learning access along with even more diversity and inclusion in the workforce. Number 6, the applicant tracking systems are going to have to change. And number 7, people working from everywhere. Now, again, I had to limit this to what I saw in 2022, which was really hard. So let me just tell you longer term. I just want to highlight a couple of things of where I think everything is headed. I really do see a world where social media is really the fabric of everyday life. And if you just heard that and you're like, oh my gosh, that sounds terrible, I'm in your camp. I want to say I don't like social media, but it's kind of growing on me a little bit because I'm starting to see the value of using it in new and different ways. And I think I see a future where we're just doing so much through social media that I think resumes probably in the future are going to go away. Like really a piece of paper that's so one dimensional. Why would I want to get to know someone one dimensionally if I can get to know them three dimensionally, in social media or virtual worlds, which I'll talk about here in a minute. So I think that the more that you can embrace social media, especially if you plan to work for the next 5, 10 plus years, the better off you're going to be. Now, that doesn't mean you got to hang out all day on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. It does mean that you should pick something and try to learn it, try to get to know it, try to understand it enough, because sooner or later you're going to be on it. Like, if you're not already, you're going to be on it all day for a lot of things. Also, the next thing I see is video is really going to become a lot more prevalent, even for people in traditional workforce. So video has become very popular and continues to grow for people who work online like me. So if you're that person, you're working online for your own business, or you plan to, video is really very critical. But I also think video will start to become very critical for anyone who wants to work for someone else, work in a traditional job. I just see video being how we will continue to create communities, connect, get work done, collaborate, talk to people, respond to people. I just see that becoming really, truly part of the fabric of life. Now, I'm not telling you need to run out and learn video. It's not like you need to do this tomorrow, but it is something to consider and think about. And I have a lot of resources around video if you feel like, hey, I really need to get on board with that, and that freaks me out. Okay. The last one I want to talk about is virtual worlds. And I just alluded to this. So if you've been paying attention, Facebook changed its name to Meta. They're really leaning into the whole augmented reality and virtual worlds. I still think that, they're going to push that in 2022. Do I think there will be widespread adoption in 2022? I think it'll take some time. But again, this is my summary of the episode where I'm talking about much more into the future. So here's something kind of interesting. Well, not kind of interesting. I think it's really interesting. In 2009, for my graduate degree, my thesis was all about the impact of virtual worlds. I looked at the pros and the cons of people basically living in virtual worlds back in 2009. And so it's so interesting to me that in 2021, here we have one of the biggest companies on earth, love them or hate them, who's pushing this quote unquote reality. And so I think this will also become a fabric of our life at some point, where we're going to be hanging out in virtual worlds. We'll maybe do shopping in our virtual worlds, meeting up with people in virtual worlds. It's not for everyone. I get it. But the reality is it's coming. And so I think the message I want to send you today is, you don't have to take advantage of everything I've talked about in this episode. If you're you really don't like a lot of this technology stuff and you're not into a lot of the things I talked about today, that's fine. I completely get it and I understand. But again, if you plan to stay in the workforce or be in the workforce for the next 5, 10, 15 years, you have to know that these things are coming. And the more that you can reduce your resistance to them and at least try to find parts of them that you're at least interested enough in, then you can keep yourself relevant. And that's really important. And by the way, I'm not a tech person. The fact that I run an online business is a sheer miracle. I'm not kidding you. My thing is, I love being in a classroom with real live humans, with an old fashioned flip chart with markers. That's how I like doing things. But I've had to embrace a lot of this technology, and the fact that I can do it, I feel like almost anybody can. Okay. So it's totally doable. Find the parts of this episode that actually do appeal to you and focus on that, because you don't have to focus on anything. Okay. The last thing I want to say, I asked my husband what his prediction was for 2022, and he said his prediction is that peppermint bark ice cream becomes the most popular ice cream. And that's because we ate it last night and it was tasty. So anyway, thought I'd leave you with something really fun. Thanks for listening or watching today. Really appreciate you being here. I hope you're getting a lot out of the show. Be sure to leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. There are some links in the show notes or underneath this video if you're watching. And let's get back to work.